Hi, I'm Carl Weber. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series. In this program, we'll be discussing the art of agreement. Think of a sentence as being like a machine made up of various kinds of parts. A sentence, of course, is made up of parts called words. We give them names like noun, verb, pronoun, adjective, adverb, and so on. These are the parts of speech. Of course, the parts of a machine must be carefully chosen to fit together. You wouldn't want to put the transmission from an '82 Chevrolet into a '96 Honda, not if you wanted the car to run properly. In the same way, the parts that are chosen to fit into a sentence must be carefully selected to work together properly. In grammar, this is known as the principle of agreement. In this program, we'll look at some of the most common problems with grammatical agreement. You'll learn some simple rules for making sure that the sentences you write obey the principle of agreement. Follow these rules, and the sentences you write will hum like a well-tuned engine. Ready? Let's begin. The first kind of agreement that's important for you to understand is agreement between subjects and verbs. And when we're dealing with subjects and verbs, the most important kind of agreement has to do with singular and plural. Let's start with the basic rules for understanding this kind of agreement. First, what do singular and plural refer to? Singular words refer to one person, place, thing, or idea. Here are a few examples of singular words: woman, village, kayak, time. Each of these refers to one person, place, thing, or idea. A woman is a person, a village is a place, a kayak, which is a kind of boat, is a thing, and time is an idea. Now, plural words refer to more than one person, place, thing, or idea. Here are some examples of plural words: women, villages, kayaks, times. In each of these cases, we've taken the singular word that we gave you a moment ago and turned it into plural. Now it refers to two or more women, villages, kayaks, or times. Now in English, plural nouns are usually formed by adding the letter S or ES to the singular form. So, for example, the word car, which is singular, becomes plural simply by adding the letter S at the end, cars. The word box becomes plural by adding ES at the end, boxes. Perhaps you can see that simply adding the letter S at the end would create a word that's rather awkward looking and difficult to pronounce. And that's why words that end in X are generally made plural by adding ES rather than simply S. In other cases, the spelling of the word varies slightly in order to turn the singular into the plural. Take a look at this word. The singular is story. The plural is stories. Once again, ES has been added at the end of the word, but notice that the letter Y has been changed to an I, so that the spelling of stories is S-T-O-R-I-E-S, a small but important change that's necessary to know if you're going to use this word correctly. Most English plural words end in S or ES, but a few form their plurals in unusual or special ways, and it's important to recognize these rules as well. These have to do with proper spelling. Here are some examples of these exceptional words. Men, women, and children are three words that are frequently used in English and all form their plurals in unusual ways. The singular of men is man, so you see that the vowel A has been changed into an E to turn the word from singular to plural. Similarly, the singular of women is woman, spelled with an A, and again the vowel has been changed to E to turn singular into plural. The singular of children is child, so here the letters R-E-N have been added at the end. What's the rule or principle that underlies these changes? Well, there really is none. You simply have to remember and apply these rules when you use these words. Take a word like leaf. When we turn this into a plural, not only do we add ES at the end, but we also change the spelling. The F that ends the word leaf turns into a V, and the plural form of leaf is leaves. Many, though not all words that end in F, are turned into plurals in just this way, by changing the F into a V and then adding ES. And then there are a few words referring to different kinds of animals which are exactly the same in the singular and the plural. For example, sheep is the singular referring to one kind of animal, and if you had a whole flock of them, you would refer to a flock of sheep. Yes, the word sheep is exactly the same in the singular and the plural. Here's a tip. When you're writing an English sentence and you have to use a plural word, and you're not certain how to form the plural, look it up in your dictionary. You'll find that for any word where the plural is formed in an unusual way, you'll be told exactly how to form it. But again, the vast majority of words in English are turned from singular to plural simply by adding S or ES at the end. Now, all the words we've looked at so far are nouns, words that name people, places, things, or ideas. Verbs can also be singular or plural. In many cases, the singular and plural form of the verb are exactly the same, but in a few cases, the singular and plural are different. Once again, you need to learn how these are formed and practice using them correctly. In most cases, it's very easy to recognize and use the singular and plural. One thing about English that may be a little bit confusing is that the singular forms of verbs often end in S or ES. This can be confusing because, as we saw a moment ago in the case of nouns, S or ES at the end is usually the sign that a plural is involved. With verbs, it's just the opposite. The singular form of verbs often end in S or ES. So, for example, look at these phrases. She jumps, they jump. He does, they do. Notice that in each case, the singular form of the verb ends in S or ES, while the plural form of the verb does not. Once again, it's simply a rule you need to learn and understand and apply to English. There's no rhyme or reason behind it. That's just the way it's done in the English language. Now, the basic principle for using singular and plural nouns and verbs properly is quite a simple one. It goes like this. A singular subject must have a singular verb. A plural subject must have a plural verb. Well, this may seem obvious enough. The problem is that in some specific kinds of sentences, applying this rule can get a bit tricky. Let's look at some of these tricky situations next. One of the situations in which subject-verb agreement may be a little tricky is when the subject of the verb is an indefinite pronoun. Now, in this series, we have an entire program devoted to pronouns and how to use them. You'll probably want to view that program in order to improve your background knowledge of pronouns and how to use them. But for our purposes today, you simply need to know that an indefinite pronoun is a word that's used in place of a noun and whose reference is indefinite or uncertain. Indefinite pronouns are words like someone, anyone, all, none, some, most, and so on. You can see from this list that indefinite pronouns refer to people or things in a way that's a little bit unclear. You can't know for sure who or what is being referred to by an indefinite pronoun unless you look at the entire context of the sentence or paragraph in which the indefinite pronoun is used. And that's why indefinite pronouns can sometimes make for tricky subject-verb agreement problems. In order to use indefinite pronouns correctly and match them up with the proper singular or plural verb, you need to know a few basic rules. Here's what you need to understand about indefinite pronouns. Basically, indefinite pronouns can be broken down into three categories. Some are always singular, some are always plural, and some may be either singular or plural, depending on the context. The following indefinite pronouns are always singular: each, either, one, neither, and all pronouns ending in body or one, such as anybody, somebody, nobody, anyone, no one, and someone. Whenever you use one of these indefinite pronouns as the subject of a verb, always consider the pronoun singular and use a singular verb as well. Now, the following indefinite pronouns are always plural: both, few, many, others, several. Perhaps you can see from this list that these indefinite pronouns always refer to more than one person, place, thing, or idea. That's why they're considered plural grammatically and need to be matched up with a plural verb. Now here comes the tricky bit. There are 5 pronouns which may be either singular or plural, depending on how they're used. We call these the SANAM pronouns, simply because those letters, S, A, N, A, M, are an acronym that reminds us of the 5 pronouns that are involved, because each of those letters is the first letter of one of the indefinite pronouns that fits into this category. The 5 SANAM pronouns are some, any, none, all, and most. These 5 pronouns, the SANAM pronouns, may be either singular or plural, depending on how they're used. Take a look at these 2 sentences. Some of the pie was eaten. Some of the students were late. Now, in both of these sentences, an indefinite pronoun is the subject of the verb. Look at the first sentence. Some of the pie was eaten. The verb here is was eaten. That's a verb phrase that begins with the helping verb was. What's the subject of the verb? Some. Some was eaten. Some of what? Some of the pie. But the pronoun some is the specific word which is the simple subject of the verb. Now, is that pronoun singular or plural? In this case, it's referring to some of the pie, which is a single thing, one piece of the pie. Therefore, we consider the pronoun singular in this sentence, and that's why the singular verb was eaten is correct. However, look at this sentence. Some of the students were late. Here the verb is were, and that's a plural verb. Why is a plural verb used? Once again, the subject is the indefinite pronoun some. But in this sentence, some refers to more than one person. Some of the students means 2, 3, 4, a group of students. And therefore, it refers to a plural subject, and that's why the plural verb were is correct. So we have the same word, the same indefinite pronoun as the subject in each of these 2 sentences. But in one case, the subject is singular, in the other, it's plural. That's the way it is with the SANAM pronouns. Here's a tip that will help you tell whether the SANAM pronoun is singular or plural in a particular sentence. The SANAM pronoun is usually followed by a prepositional phrase. In both of these sentences, the prepositional phrase begins with the preposition of the pie, of the students. If you look at the prepositional phrase and look at the object of the prepositional phrase, that will provide a clue as to whether the SANAM pronoun is singular or plural. If the object of the prepositional phrase is singular, then the SANAM pronoun is singular. If the object of the prepositional phrase is plural, then the SANAM pronoun is also plural. That's why some of the pie is singular, because pie is singular, whereas some of the students is plural, because students is plural. So look at the prepositional phrase that follows the SANAM pronoun, and that will give you a clue as to whether the SANAM pronoun is singular or plural. Here's another tricky situation for subject-verb agreement. In some sentences, the subject of the verb is a collective noun. Now, what is a collective noun? A collective noun is a noun that's singular in form, that is, it usually doesn't end in S or ES, but which refers to a group of people, places, things, or ideas. Some examples of collective nouns are team, group, class, flock, committee, family. I think you can see that in each of these cases, the word refers to a number of people who are all gathered together under a single word. And that's why we call these collective nouns. Here's the rule. When the subject of the verb is a collective noun, use either a singular verb or a plural verb, depending on how the noun is used. When the noun refers to the group as a whole, use a singular verb. When the noun refers to the group as individuals, use a plural verb. Here are a couple of examples that should clarify this distinction. Look at this sentence. The team is ready for the game. The verb here is, and the subject of the verb is team. And team is a collective noun. It refers to a group of people who all play a particular sport. Now, in this sentence, we're told the team is ready for the game. That means the team as a whole is ready. All of them together are set as one unit. They're prepared and ready to play. Therefore, in this particular case, the collective noun refers to the group as a whole, and therefore a singular verb is appropriate. Contrast that with this sentence. The team are dressing in the locker room. Once again, the collective noun team is the subject of the verb. In this case, the verb is are dressing, and here a plural verb has been used. Why? Well, think about what the team is doing. When the team are getting dressed, it's a group of individuals who are all getting dressed. One person is probably putting on his shoes, another person may be tying his tie, a third person may be combing his hair. They're all doing different things at the same time, all of which adds up to the collective group dressing together. But it's a number of individuals doing separate things that go to make up the act of dressing in the locker room. So in this case, the collective noun is being used to refer to a group of people who are doing things separately. And that's why treating the collective noun as plural and using a plural verb is appropriate in this sentence. I'll point out that in the majority of cases, collective nouns are singular and are used as such. So when in doubt, go with a singular verb, because in most cases, when a collective noun is used, the group is being referred to as a whole. And it is the exception when the collective noun is being used to refer to the group as a collection of individuals, as in this case. But that's the rule, and now you know why collective nouns will sometimes be used with a singular verb, sometimes with a plural verb. If you practice this distinction, you shouldn't have too much difficulty using collective nouns. Here's another tricky situation for subject-verb agreement. A subject that describes an amount is singular. Sometimes the subject of a verb appears to be plural, and yet when you think about it, it's describing an amount which is really one thing. Here's an example. $1 million is a lot of money. In this case, the verb is, which is singular. What's the subject of the verb? Well, the subject is the phrase, $1 million. Now, that certainly looks plural. Dollars has an S at the end, and it does refer to lots of dollars, more than $1, 1 million of them in this case. So $1 million certainly seems as though it ought to be plural. But let's think about what the sentence is saying. The sentence is talking about $1 million as an amount. And it's talking about it as one thing. It's saying that this whole pile of money, all added together, is a lot of money. That's why a singular verb is appropriate in this case, because although it's plural in form, the phrase describes an amount, and therefore we treat it as singular. Here's another example. 5 minutes in the dentist's chair feels like a long time. Here the verb is feels. Again, it's singular. What's the subject? 5 minutes, or minutes. Once again, it's grammatically plural. It ends in S, and it does refer to more than one thing, 5 minutes. But if we step back and think about how the phrase is being used, it really refers to the 5 minutes as a single unit, one stretch of time, which may be very unpleasant when you're sitting in the dentist's chair, and that's why it feels like a long time. So that one stretch of time, that one amount, is treated as singular, and that's why a singular verb is appropriate. Finally, one more tip for another type of tricky situation. The phrase, the number, is singular. The phrase, a number, is plural. These two phrases might seem equivalent, and yet they're treated differently for grammatical purposes. Here's what we mean. The number of children in the family is 3. In this case, we're using the phrase, the number. And this is really an example of the situation we talked about a moment before. The subject in this case is describing an amount, the amount of children, or the number of children in the family. So we really consider it singular. The number is 3. Look at this example. A number of children are waiting for their parents. Now, in this case, we're using the phrase, a number, which may look very similar to the number. But in this context, what the phrase, a number of children, is referring to is several children. more than one child, 3, 4, 5 children. That's what we mean when we say a number of children. So in this case, the subject of the verb is really plural, and that's why the plural verb are waiting has been used. The basic rule that's easy to remember is the number is singular, a number is plural. Subject-verb agreement is usually a simple matter in most sentences. Singular subject, singular verb. Plural subject, plural verb. But in tricky situations like the ones we've just seen, it can be a little difficult to tell what type of verb is appropriate to use. The rules we've just covered should help. Turn to your study guide. We've provided an exercise that will give you a chance to practice these rules and test your ability to choose the right verb for certain tricky situations in English. Try your hand at the questions, and when you're finished, come back to this program and we'll look at them together. In each of these sentences, a verb was omitted, and your job is to decide which of the two verbs you're given to choose from is correct in the context. In each case, the two verbs that are provided are first singular, then plural. So if you could figure out whether the subject was singular or plural, it would be pretty easy to choose the correct verb. Let's see how well you did. The first example reads, 400 pages seems or seem like an awfully long reading assignment for the holiday weekend. Here the two verbs are singular seems, plural seem. What's the subject, and is it singular or plural? Well, the subject is the amount, 400 pages. It looks plural, and it certainly is plural in form, since pages ends in S, and it does refer to more than one page, in fact, 400 pages. But remember our rule that a subject that describes an amount is normally singular. In this case, the entire amount, 400 pages, that long book, is being treated and considered as a single thing. That whole amount is a long reading assignment. And that's why the singular verb seems would actually be correct. Remember that when the subject is plural in form, but it describes an amount which is treated as one thing, you want a singular verb. And that's why seems would be correct in this sentence. Our next example. Neither of the injured dancers is or are feeling well enough to perform this evening. Here we have a choice between the singular verb is and the plural verb are. Which is correct? Well, the subject is neither. And you might recall that neither is one of the pronouns that's an indefinite pronoun which is always singular. That's one of the pronouns on that list which would always be singular. And in fact, if you think about how the pronoun is being used, you can see that it refers to one person. When we say neither of the dancers, we mean each one of them, one at a time. We're considering that each of them individually is not feeling well enough to perform this evening. Since we're talking about each of the dancers one at a time, it should be considered singular. And the pronoun neither is singular grammatically, and that's why the singular verb is would be correct in this sentence. Our next example. The orchestra has or have recently completed a successful tour of several Asian countries. Now in this sentence, the subject is the collective noun orchestra. The word orchestra is singular in form, but it refers to a large number of people. 80, 90, 100 people go together to make up an orchestra. So it's a collective noun. And remember, a collective noun may be either singular or plural, depending on how it's used. Most often, a collective noun is singular, and that is when the collective noun is being used to refer to the group as a whole, doing one action together. In some exceptional circumstances, the collective noun may be plural if the sentence is describing actions taken by each of the individual members of the collective noun. How is this collective noun being used? Well, we're told that the orchestra completed a successful tour of several Asian countries. Does that describe an action taken separately by all of the individual members of the orchestra? The oboists, the drummers, the fiddle players, the horn players? No, it's describing something that the entire orchestra did together as a unit. Therefore, the collective noun is being used to refer to the group as a unit and should be considered singular. So we want the singular verb has rather than the plural verb have. The sentence should read, "The orchestra has recently completed a successful tour of several Asian countries." The next sentence, "All of the stonemasons working on the cathedral is or are residents of Harlem." Once again, we have to decide whether the subject is singular or plural. Now, what is the subject of the verb? Is it cathedral, stonemasons, or all? It's actually the pronoun all. The sentence is not saying something that the cathedral is or are, nor is it saying something that the stonemasons is or are. It's saying something that all is or are. And in the next lesson in this program, we'll explain exactly why the pronoun all should be zeroed in on as the subject of the verb. It's a little bit tricky in its own right. But the indefinite pronoun all is the subject of this verb. Now, is all singular or plural? Remember that all is one of the 5 indefinite pronouns that we call the Sanam pronouns. Some, all, none, any, and most. Those 5 pronouns may be either singular or plural, depending on how they're used. Now, in this case, is the pronoun all referring to one or more than one person? Remember our tip. Look at the prepositional phrase that follows the Sanam pronoun, and that will give you a clue as to whether one or more than one subject is being referred to. Here, the prepositional phrase that follows the pronoun all is "of the stonemasons." And the object of that preposition of is masons, which is plural. So taken together, the entire phrase, "all of the stonemasons," is referring to more than one person. It's a group of stonemasons. So in this case, the Sanam pronoun all is being used as a plural pronoun, and so a plural verb is necessary. The sentence ought to read, "All of the stonemasons working on the cathedral are residents of Harlem," plural. And our last example, "Everyone in the class was or were surprised at how easy the final exam was." Once again, an indefinite pronoun is being used as the subject of the verb. In this case, the indefinite pronoun is everyone. Now remember what we said. All indefinite pronouns that end in either body or one are always singular. So everyone, someone, no one, all 3 of those indefinite pronouns would always be treated as singular grammatically. So we need a singular verb in this sentence, and it ought to read, "Everyone in the class was surprised at how easy the final exam was." Were you surprised at how easy these questions were? I hope so. Let's move on to our next lesson. As we've seen, the basic principle of subject-verb agreement isn't very difficult. A singular subject needs a singular verb, and a plural subject needs a plural verb. In the last lesson, we looked at certain types of words which make it a little tricky to determine whether the subject is singular or plural. Specifically, we looked at indefinite pronouns and collective nouns. Now, there are other kinds of sentences in which determining subject-verb agreement can be a little bit tricky. And in this lesson, we're going to look at some of these other types of tricky sentence structures which make subject-verb agreement a little bit difficult. One tricky type of sentence for subject-verb agreement involves a compound subject. Now, as you may recall, a compound subject consists of 2 or more parts which are joined by a conjunction, usually and or. And taken together, these parts make up the subject of the verb. Now, when the subject is compound, if the parts of the compound subject are joined by and, you usually use a plural verb. Here's an example. Omar and Sarah are going bowling. Here, the verb is are going, and the subject is the compound subject, Omar and Sarah. We have 2 parts joined by the conjunction and this is a very typical kind of compound subject. Notice that although each of the parts of the compound subject is singular, Omar, Sarah, each of these is a singular word, taken together, they make up a compound subject which is treated as plural. After all, Omar and Sarah are 2 people, and therefore the subject of this verb now refers to more than one person. It's plural, and a plural verb are going is required. So this is the most typical kind of compound subject, where we have two or more parts joined by the conjunction and normally this would be treated as a plural subject. However, there are two exceptions. First, if the two parts together make up one thing, use a singular verb rather than a plural verb. Here's an example. The skull and crossbones was a famous pirate symbol. Now, in this sentence, we have a compound subject, skull and crossbones, two things joined by the conjunction and. So your immediate inclination would probably be to say, well, this is a plural subject, and so we need a plural verb. And that means that the verb was is wrong. That's singular, and we should use the plural were instead. Here's the problem. In this case, the compound subject doesn't really refer to two or more things. Instead, the skull and crossbones is one symbol. Perhaps you've seen pictures of pirate ships from the old days flying a black flag with the symbol of a skull and crossbones. Taken together, that symbol, the skull and crossbones, makes up one image, which is being described in this sentence as a famous pirate symbol. Since the two things that are mentioned here really go together to form one image or one symbol, we treat it as singular grammatically. And that's why the singular verb was is actually correct in this sentence. The skull and crossbones was a famous pirate symbol. This exception to the rule doesn't come up very often, but when it does, you should be aware of it and be looking for a singular verb rather than a plural verb. Here's the second exception. If the two parts of the compound subject are preceded by each or every, use a singular verb. When we use the words each or every in front of the parts of a compound subject, we are really changing the subject so that we're talking about each element of the subject separately and individually. And that's why we're turning the subject from plural into singular. Look at this example. Each pot and pan was washed and carefully put away. Notice that in this sentence we've got the singular verb was washed and was put away, rather than the plural verb were. Why is that? Well, here we do have a compound subject, pot and pan, joined by the conjunction and, which would normally lead us to expect a plural verb. But it's preceded by the word each. And therefore, the subject is changed from plural to singular. We're now talking about each individual pot and pan, one at a time. And therefore, we use the singular verb was rather than plural. Once again, this exception doesn't come up too often. 90% of the time, when you have a compound subject that consists of two or more parts joined by the conjunction and, you want a plural verb. But in this particular case, you want a singular verb instead. Now, when the subject is compound, if the parts of the compound subject are joined by the conjunction or, we have a different rule. In this case, the verb should match the subject that is closest to the verb. This is a slightly strange and surprising rule, but let's look at a couple of examples and you'll see how it works. Either Andre or his parents have left an umbrella in the closet. Now, here we have a compound subject which consists of two parts, Andre, his parents. Now, notice that one of the parts is singular, Andre, the other is plural, his parents, and they're joined by the conjunction or. That means the rule kicks in that the verb should agree with whichever subject is closer to the verb. We have two subjects, one singular, one plural. Which one is closer to the verb have left? Well, his parents is closer to the verb than Andre. Since the plural subject is closer to the verb, it comes second in the compound subject. The verb should also be plural. So have left is correct. What does this mean? It means that if you were to reverse the order of the parts in the compound subject in this particular sentence, the verb would have to change. So if the sentence were changed to read like this, either Andre's parents or Andre, then the verb would have to be has left. Singular would now be correct because Andre, the singular subject, is now closer to the verb than the plural subject. So it does make a difference what order the subjects are given in this particular type of situation. So when the compound subject consists of two or more parts separated by or, decide on subject-verb agreement by looking at the subject that's closer to the verb. One more example. The students or their teacher is expected to close the classroom door. Same kind of situation. Here we have two subjects separated by or. Students, their teacher. The first one, students, is plural. Their teacher is singular. Which one should the verb match? Well, since their teacher is closer to the verb, is expected is correct. That's a singular verb, and it matches up with their teacher, which is also singular. We've been talking about compound subjects quite a bit. Here's another somewhat tricky or misleading situation that many students get wrong. Words like as well as and in addition to do not create a compound subject. Now, you might think that words or phrases like as well as and in addition to should be grammatically the same as the word and. After all, they mean much the same thing. But grammatically, they are treated differently. The conjunction and creates a compound subject when it's used to join two words or phrases describing subjects of the verb. However, when the phrase as well as or the phrase in addition to is used in place of the conjunction and, the effect is different. Take a look at this sentence. The principal, as well as her husband, was a special guest at the awards banquet. The verb is was. What's the subject? Well, the subject is principal. Notice that her husband is not part of the subject in this case. We don't have a compound subject because rather than the conjunction and, the phrase as well as has been used. You might also notice that in this particular sentence, the words as well as her husband have been set off by commas. That indicates correctly that that entire phrase, as well as her husband, is a bit of an interrupter. It comes in between the subject and the verb and doesn't become part of the subject. Therefore, the subject is the singular principal, and the singular verb was is correct. If we were to take away the words as well as and substitute the conjunction and, notice what would happen. We'd get rid of the commas, and the sentence would now read, the principal and her husband were special guests at the awards banquet. Now we would have a compound subject joined by the conjunction and, principal and her husband, and the two together would make up the subject, which would become plural, and the verb would have to become the plural were. But as long as the phrase as well as is used, we don't have a compound subject. We have a singular subject only, and a singular verb is required. When words separate the subject and the verb, finding the subject may be tricky. We've already seen several sentences where this was the case, where isolating and identifying the subject of the verb is not so easy, because a number of words come in between the subject and the verb. Here's a tip that helps with 90% of these sentences. Eliminate prepositional phrases before trying to identify the subject. As a general rule, a prepositional phrase never contains the subject of the verb. And therefore, when you're looking for the subject of a sentence, in order to make sure that you've got subject-verb agreement correct, you can mentally eliminate all the prepositional phrases, all the phrases that begin with those little prepositions, words like of, in, by, for, from, to, with, and so on. Eliminate those prepositions and the words that follow them, and what remains must contain the subject. That's an easy way of eliminating all the words that might distract you from isolating the real subject and therefore confuse you as to how subject-verb agreement should work. If you can eliminate the prepositional phrases, that will help you a lot in zeroing in on the correct subject of the verb. Take a look at this example. The distance between the Earth and the more distant stars of our galaxy is difficult to measure. In this case, the verb is easy to find, as it usually is in most sentences. The verb is. Now that's a singular verb. Is the sentence correct or incorrect? Well, we have to identify the subject in order to determine whether a singular verb is correct or incorrect. Now, what is the subject? What is it that's difficult to measure? Is it the distance? Is it the Earth? Is it the stars? Is it the galaxy? All of those are nouns, and any one of them could be the subject of the verb. But which one really is the subject of the verb? Well, in order to figure out what's difficult to measure, we need to eliminate prepositional phrases. That will help us zero in on what the real subject of the verb is. And there are a few prepositional phrases here. Between the Earth and the more distant stars